Okay, so that's all, and welcome everyone. Welcome to our today's session, which is on how to build a WhatsApp chatbot using Python and Twilio. So hi, I am Poojita Garg. Nice to meet you all, and I'll be your speaker for today. And it'll be a really exciting hour, discussing about how we can create our own WhatsApp chatbot. So let's dive right into it. So, there can be many types of WhatsApp chatbots, and you might have also come across many for different purposes. For, this session, we are going to develop a reminder bot. So this would be a very simple bot, which will just ask you a reminder date and reminder message, and would, eventually remind you about that message at that set date. Okay, so this would be essentially the purpose for the bot which we are building today. So we'll be using Python, WhatsApp, and Twilio. A little about me. So I'm Poojita Garg. I'm an engineer, developer, and researcher. Currently, I'm working as a research intern at Georgia Tech and IIT Roper remotely. And I'm a CS graduate from India. So I graduated this year. 2021, little out of habit there. And I have authored 4 research publications and a patent in my undergrad for one of my projects. And I'm a passionate advocate for women in technology as well. And I serve as track lead for Women Who Code Mobile and Python tracks. So before starting our talk, where can you get the materials? So this is the GitHub repo, where I have posted all the code for, which we are going to use for today. And you can also scan the QR code given on the screen, and there you can access the GitHub repo. Okay, so a little sneak peek into what we are going to build today. So this is essentially a kind of a flow of how things would be working. And so let's say that I am a WhatsApp user, and I'm using that bot. So we'll be using Twilio for communication. It will essentially connect our WhatsApp with our code. Then we'll be hosting all of our code, the Python code, on Heroku, so that it can constantly run. So you can see here that there are two, let's say, 2 directories basically, which we will be hosting. So you can say that there are 2 apps which we are hosting on Heroku. So we'll start with the WhatsApp bot app. So this app will essentially contain all the logic, which will be, which will be used to create a conversation between our user. So here it is, the WhatsApp bot. Again, after asking the user for a reminder date and message, then it will save all that information to the Google Sheets so that it can be checked later on, and the information can be retrieved later on. Now the other app, which is again hosted on Heroku, that we'll call it Scheduler. So that will constantly check our Google Sheets to whether there's a reminder set for today, let's say. So it will check that. So it will retrieve data from the Google Sheets and check. And if that's true, if there's some reminder which is set for today, then it will send a reminder at the scheduled time and date to the user. So a couple of requirements which you will need to follow along. So it's like Python 3.6 or newer. Secondly, a smartphone with an active phone number and WhatsApp installed. And thirdly is the Twilio account. So if you're new to Twilio, you can create a free account, and you can review all the features and limitations at the Twilio website. So just to get you more excited about today's talk, a couple of Python packages which you're going to use. So I'm assuming that everybody is really excited about Python. So these are when I was creating this project, I was trying to, use many different Python packages so that, to get a more glimpse of what each package and how looks like, how to use it. So these are some of the packages which we are going to use, including Flask, Twilio Python helper library, which is essential for using Twilio, and then gspread, which is used if you want to read and write anything on Google Sheets, then AP scheduler, which is to schedule your jobs, and then few datetime packages. Okay, so I've divided, like, not to get things overwhelming here, I have divided the whole talk into 5 major steps. So the first is to configure the Twilio WhatsApp sandbox. The second is to create a Flask chatbot service and coding logic. The third is that saving reminders into the Google Sheets. And the fourth is to schedule the reminder messages. And the fifth is to deploying apps on Heroku. So I hope you are all ready. Let's begin with step number 1, which is to configure the Twilio WhatsApp sandbox. So if you're new to Twilio, Twilio is a US cloud communication platform as a service company. And Twilio allows software developers to programmatically make and receive phone calls, send or receive text messages or WhatsApp messages in our case, and perform other kinds of communication functions using its web service APIs. So it's a very handy tool, nothing to worry much about. What you can do is you can just create a free account on going on twilio.com, and you'll get like a $15 credit for a new login, and you can use their services as much as of that, like for free. So it's very good. So we'll be using WhatsApp Sandbox, like their WhatsApp messaging platform. So it's a very interesting platform. Here, what you have to do is you just have to go to messaging and then search for like send a WhatsApp message or something like a WhatsApp messaging platform. And when you go there, you will find a Twilio sandbox for WhatsApp. So sandbox is essentially like a virtual person. You can say like it's a chatbot. It's a virtual place where you can easily develop and test your application. So there will be a number associated to your sandbox. Okay, so you have to do is that you have to save that number on your phone and then send a WhatsApp message to that number. So there's nobody like behind that number, but it is just a service. And here there will be a join code. So you just have to type that code, like the join code, which will be mentioned on your system, on your console there. And once you do that, so there will be a message which you'll receive, and it will tell you that, okay, now your sandbox is like set up, like it's connected to your phone. So there are very easy, like few steps here, which are very straightforward, and you just need to follow them as to set up a one-way messaging and two-way messaging, and then you are ready to use your Twilio sandbox for your function. So that's all for like setting up the Twilio sandbox. And now if we move towards, writing the Python code. So for that, you need to first of all create an empty directory and name it WhatsApp bot. So this is after, writing all the files which we are going to use and which we're going to talk about in the rest of the sections as well. So your WhatsApp bot directory would look like something like this. So it will have these like 5 files. Okay, so now once that you have created an empty directory, it's time for step number 2, which is to create a Flask chatbot service and coding logic. So to all those who are new to Flask, so Python has several web frameworks like Flask and Django, etc. And these can be used to create web apps and APIs. So these web frameworks provide functionality for building web applications, including managing HTTP requests and rendering the templates. So for this tutorial, we'll be using Flask, which is one of the popular web frameworks for Python. So to use it, let's install it first with the command pip install Flask. And once that's done, you can start. Start with creating like empty file app.py. So all of our coding logic behind the chatbot would go in this file. So basically what we're doing is that we're creating a web app and then, routing it to our Twilio, like we're connecting it with Twilio later on. So this is a basic Flask app would look like how to make a Flask web app. So this is the basic code for that. So before I start with the what the code means, so just a note here that we won't be going in like super detail about the code which is going to come forward, like all the code, because that will be very much overwhelming. So what I've done is that I have also created a well-documented blog for this talk, and which I would ask Stephanie to put the link for in the chat. So if you have any doubt, like there in the blog, I have tried to mention the reason for every line of code which I have used. So, and also the links. So I have tried to include all of the links, which will be helpful for you if you want to dig deep into any of the, let's say, package or any of the function. So you can, later on, you can also kind of look into that if that's what you would like to do. So here, what we're going to do is the basic, like the major crux of why we are using this piece of code and what essentially this code lines are doing. So this is the general how we create a small Flask application. So we start with importing our required modules. The third line of code, which is this, is basically to create a Flask application object, and we're naming it app, and which contains all the data about the application and the methods, or you can say the object functions that tell the application to do certain action. Later on in the last line, we are also running it. So it is one such method of that object. In the fifth line, what we are doing is the action is called routing. So basically we are mapping a URL path, okay, to a function which is reply. So you're mapping the /SMS to the function that is reply, inside the reply function, we're going to code all the logic. So that's the function of that. And what that methods is, so the methods is a list, which is a keyword argument that lets the Flask know what kind of HTTP requests are allowed. So as you know that there are two kinds of HTTP requests, like the GET requests, to send the data from your application to the user, and the POST requests, which is to receive the data from the user. So for this, for our purpose, we are going to use the POST request because we want the data to be received like from the user. Also, we are establishing an endpoint which is /SMS here to the URL, so which we are going to see later where to use it. Okay. So now that's done. If that when that's done, we are extending our code to include the Twilio libraries. Okay, so you'll import Twilio, and after importing it, basically Twilio expects the webhook needs to be given in TWIML language. So Twilio has its own Twilio markup language, which is an XML based language. So the Twilio helper library for Python, which we are going to use. So this is we are using the messaging response. So basically in this code, what we are doing is that we want to communicate with our user. Okay, so while we are doing that through Twilio, we need everything to be, in sync with what Twilio expects our code to give a response. So for that, we need to make sure that we are using this Twilio helper functions, and we are using messaging response here. So in the later part of the code, you can see that majorly we are first of all, we are like accessing our incoming message, which is very important, right? So for doing that, we are using the request package. So basically we are so the incoming message which is sent by the user is included in the payload of the post request with the key of body. So here we are kind of accessing that request.form.get. So from the payload of the key of body, we are accessing it. Later on, we are like converting everything which the string which we are getting into lowercase, so that to avoid any discrepancies, because later on we'll be like comparing strings. So for that case, and then later we're just setting the response as like an object for messaging response. So once that's done, that was the initial setup. Now let's talk about how, like, what the logic goes behind our chatbot, like what are we trying to implement. So as I talked about earlier, so our chatbot is fairly simple, and we're just trying to create a reminder bot which will ask the user for a date and would ask for a reminder, right? So it is fairly simple. So what I've done is like I've taken 4 types of user input. So I'm expecting that the user can input like these 4 things. First of all, I've created a trigger. Like, let's say I've created hello as a trigger. So there's a chatbot. Whenever a user wants to, set a reminder, he will type something. So I'm expecting the user would type hello, right? So that's one type of trigger I've created to start the conversation with the bot. The second, what user can type. When it will say hello, we'll ask that, okay, do you want to set a reminder? So the expected answers could be yes or no. So depending upon that, that's another type of response which we can get. The other type of response, like the user input would be to set a date and the message, right? So for that, what I've done is, because later we have to find out whether that's date or whether what the user is saying is a reminder. I've created like my own custom keyword for that. Like, let's say this is the syntax of how the user should write, so which we will mention in the code as well, like so that please type in this format. So what I've done is, like, let's say date, which is kind of a custom keyword here, at the rate, and then we would ask the user to type the date, whichever they want. So that is how we are expecting our user. That's another type of response which we are trying to get from the user. Similarly, for the reminder message, it's reminder at the rate and then type the message. We'll see later how we are going to use it in our code. These were the major things we were expecting a user to respond with. Now let's talk about the chatbot functions. So there will be 2 major functions, because we have created a fairly a simple bot, and it can perform 2 functions, which is, first of all, it will set the reminder date, which essentially means that whatever the date the user has prompted us with, we are going to save it to the Google Sheets to be later retrieved by the scheduler. Similarly, to set the reminder body, so just saving it onto the Google Sheet. So these are the the definitions for these 2 functions, basically. Okay, so once that's clear, let's see how we are coding the logic. So it's very simple. Again, the steps which I have just mentioned, the 4 types of responses, we're just coding it using conditional statements. So, so the first conditional statement would be that if hello is present in our incoming message, that means that's the initial conversation, like that's a trigger. So for that trigger, we are just asking, hello, do you want to, like we're replying it with, hello, do you want to set a reminder? So that's the first part. Okay, so for second part, let me just go back. Here you can see on the line 18, we are, having word, we are basically splitting our incoming message with @ and we are getting the whole list in words, in the words variable. So that is the reason why we did that custom syntax thing for fetching the date and reminder message. So later on, we're just splitting with @ and we're kind of trying to analyze what kind of reply the user has given to us. So in the first type of conditional statement, we are using that if the length of words is equal to 1 and yes is present, and or if no is present. So these are two types of conditions. So in this, that means that it is the second type of response which we were expecting from the user, which is in response to our do you want to set a reminder, right? So length of words means that definitely there is no @ like it is just one element in the list when we are splitting it. That means, and if there is yes, then ask for a date. And if there is no, then just say, okay, have a nice day. Later on, if length of words is not equal to 1, so that means that there was @ and it has like actually split into more pieces, right? So for that, I'm checking that for that, like the first element of our list would contain the input type. So whether it will be date or it can be reminder, because as per our syntax. So if it's date, then just ask the reminder as well. Like, so because we are asking date first and then the reminder, so then ask for the reminder. If that's the reminder, then okay, then that means then now just the functions need to be performed and the conversation is over. So okay, your reminder is set. Then in between, we are also calling those two chatbot functions, which we defined earlier, like the set reminder date and set reminder body. So we're not like actually defining, we're just calling the functions and we're not defining it. And we'll be doing that in another file, which will be dedicated to, sending and receiving messages from the Google Sheets. So that's a whole different story there. So we'll be talking about it, about that part in the next parts, next slides. Also, in continuation to the previous code in the app.py. So this is just that if nothing is responded, then just prompt something to tell the user to like reply in a correct format or something. And these are just the functions here. I'm just calling another like save reminder date and save a reminder body to keep it like a little organized. Okay, so this brings us to step number 3, which is saving reminders onto the Google Sheets. So I hope that everyone has like used Google Sheets sometime till now, and it's a quite handy tool to use. So we have a Python package which is called gspread, which is like particularly dedicated to Google interacting with Google Sheets through a Python code. For that, to use it, you need to install it with install gspread. And I would just like to mention that we'll be taking all the questions at the end. So you can like type the questions in the chat as well. So I'll be just responding to them in the end because there's a lot to cover in like there are many other steps as well. So I just want to finish like the talk first and then take the questions. Okay, so with install gspread, we'll be just installing it. Later, to for that, we're just creating another file, which is I've named it gsheet function underscore function.py, and there I'll be defining those functions, the save, reminder, date, and message, and then later you have seen that it can be imported to app.py. Now, but before that, there are a few like series of steps which you need to follow to get your Google account authenticated to be used in an external piece of code. So that's true for any other GCP APIs or services if you have used like earlier in your code. So that's completely true for all of those. So they are like the same steps. So you can find these steps like they're in the blog as well. And you just need to follow them. So at the end of all these steps, you'll get a credentials.json, which is an auto-created file. You need to download it. Okay, that will be created for you through your GCP, and there that file needs to be present in your directory where you are using it. Where you're using the gspread package, this credentials.json file should be there in the same directory. That's just the caveat here. So once that's done, once your account is authenticated, you are free to use gspread in your code. So let's talk about how we have organized this gsheet function file for us. After importing the libraries and stuffs, then there are some some typical things which we need to authenticate the credentials and link the credentials with our code. So these are just the typical things. It's like it has to be done this way only. Okay. Later on, from the line 10, you can see that here we have started using the gspread functions. So the first of all, we have used .open to open the spreadsheet. So before going in the code, let me just show you how your spreadsheet would look like. Just create a new spreadsheet, name it something. I've named it reminders. So this is how, after storing some values, your spreadsheet would look like. So I've just created like a very fairly basic spreadsheet sheet. I just created 2 columns, date, named it date, and reminder messages, and just saved a bunch of reminder dates and messages. Like after through that conversation for testing purposes. So coming back to the code, here you need to first open your this spreadsheet, which is reminders. Then .sheet1. Sheet1 is the name of the sheet in the spreadsheet which you're using. So I've just kept it for the by default name, which is sheet1. Then you're using other functions like row values, column values, length. So just to find out, the next empty cell for you to add the values, right? For you to save the values. Then you have created those 2 functions which we were talking about earlier to save the reminder date and save the reminder body. For that, you are using the .update cell function, right? To see first the empty cell, which is row filled +1. So that would be the empty cell. First, you're finding the filled rows. And then you're just, putting the date and message and just updating the cell with that. Okay. So with this, we are like completed with the half of our project, which was to establish a conversation, like the code, the logic behind the conversation with the bot. Now there's the second part, which is to schedule the reminder messages. So for now, we have our reminder message, we have our reminder dates. So in this form, right? So these are some of the reminder message and dates which a user has, has input, and you have saved it onto Google Sheets. Now you want to schedule it as per required. So for that, I'm creating another directory and I'm naming it scheduler. This is how your directory would look like after we'll go over all the files which will be needed. So there can be multiple ways to set a reminder, right? So what I'm doing in this case is that I have set a specific time. I'm sorry. I have set a specific time of the day, let's say 9 o'clock a.m., which is in the morning. And there you'll get all the reminders for that day. So that like you can schedule your remaining day for whatever task you like have been reminded of for doing for that day. So this is my logic. Like you can create your own logic. So when we're talking this route of scheduling messages, I just want to tell you here that like the WhatsApp bot thing and the scheduler thing, these both are basically different routes with respect to Twilio. So Twilio is perceiving them as two different routes. In the scheduler part, we'll be using a Twilio helper function, which will basically be communicating our message. But in the WhatsApp bot, you'll see later on when we will add the URL endpoint to your console, which you created in the first step. So there we have directly, we are directly putting the endpoint that whatever message Twilio receives it from our sandbox, it should, direct towards that WhatsApp bot functionality, which we have created earlier. But here, because here a user is not initiating a conversation, right? A user is not triggering the bot. It is being triggered by itself. So that whenever that day comes, when the reminder is set for, the bot should automatically send a reminder to you. So that is a different route which we are following here. So for that, we are basically communicating through Twilio from our code, from our Python code. So we have both the options in Twilio. So for that purpose, I've created a Twilio function.py. Okay, this file. Here, we'll be using, again, from Twilio.rest, we'll import client. Two things, account, SID, and auth token. These are two credentials which are there, which are associated with your Twilio account and which need to be placed here so to authenticate that you are the right person who's accessing that account. So you'll find those in your profile on Twilio's console, fairly simple process. Do that, you just copy paste it here in form of string. Then the client is just authenticating it, okay? Now I've created a small function here, which we will call later by our scheduler that, okay, we'll call this function from the scheduler, which is send reminder. We have two parameters there like date and reminder, date and rem, which we're going to pass through the scheduler. Here, this is the format how Twilio uses, how we can send a message from our code, okay? So this is the from number, which is essentially our sandbox number. So all sandbox numbers are the same. The difference is the code which it gives you, which is unique to you. So this is the sandbox number. Make sure to write it as it is, like type WhatsApp : which this is important because if you don't write WhatsApp : then it will treat it as, I guess it will treat it as like a simple message. So we have to write it WhatsApp : and the whole number. Because when you'll be writing your number, so just make sure to write it in similar fashion. Then body, and just I've kind of formatted it in this form, like reminder, date, and the next line, the actual reminder message. So that's all for Twilio function.py. Let's see how we are going to use the scheduler, which we discussed, like the AP scheduler. But before that, couple of things. First of all, we are going, like I discussed about like setting a fixed time. So for the AP scheduler, we'll be using a blocking scheduler. So there are many types of schedulers which you can have in your module AP scheduler. Two popular ones are blocking scheduler and background scheduler. So that's all for so whether you want your main thread to be blocked or not. Because my function of the function of my code is exactly to do just one thing, which is scheduling, and there's no other thread. So I'll be using a blocking scheduler, and there are various triggers. So I'll be using the date trigger because I essentially have a date to which I want to trigger. So that's two things. And also there's one thing when we'll be dealing with date time Python, date time, when we are working with dates and time in Python. There's one thing to take care of is that when later on, when we will be deploying our apps on Heroku will return calls for the current time in UTC. So just to, so I found this package, PYTZ package, which is used when we are working with different time zones. So as I was in IST, Indian time zone, so I tried to convert it into UTC, just to keep things like basically to try out this PyTZ package majorly. So that was interesting, and we'll see how to do that. Okay. Okay, one thing more here is that before I go into how the code looks like, what logic I have applied here is that I will be traversing the date, like the date column of the Google Sheets where I've saved the dates. I will be traversing that every day, like at a fixed time. Like let's say in the morning, I'll be traversing once each day, and I'll be seeing if I'll find out like what date is today in the code, and then I'll be matching it with the dates which is mentioned in that column. So if any of those dates match, so like today is when one reminder needs to be set. So that day would be the day when I want the reminder for, right? So this is the logic behind how I'm using the scheduler. So it will be more clear when we go over the code. Here also we'll be making use of the gspread package, because here we are not writing anything on the Google Sheets, but we are kind of accessing the Google Sheets to check the data, what is stored in it. So just a couple of packages which we imported, okay. And then the typical things, the Google using the gspread package, like authentication stuff, which we're using again. Then we're just like processing our dates in the correct formats, which is a bit of a hassle when when working with date and time. So just doing that stuff here, and just converting the dates, whichever I'll mention from my time zone to UTC. Later on, I just created a scheduler, and then again accessing my worksheet, my Google spreadsheet, and then again the later part, the last part of the code is again the same thing, like coding the logic which I just explained, to check first traverse all the dates mentioned, and then checking if something is like equal to the one which is today, and then just calling the scheduler.add job. Here I'm calling the sendrem function, which we like defined here in the Twilio function py. We defined the sendrem function, so I'm calling this here by the scheduler. This is the way we do it: scheduler.add job and sendrem. Date is the trigger, and then my date, which is in UTC DT, which is the date here, and then the arguments. So these arguments are basically the date and the reminder values, which we will be using in our sendrem. And later in the last line, we're just starting our scheduler. Okay, so once that's done, we come to our like step 5, which is the last of all the steps, which is deploying apps on Heroku. So if you're new to Heroku, Heroku is a platform as a service that enables developers to build, run, and operate applications entirely in the cloud. So to keep running our applications constantly, we will deploy both of our applications, which is the WhatsApp bot and scheduler, separately on cloud platform named Heroku. So there's a reason why we created two different directories and why we are separately deploying it on Heroku. So the reason, it will be just clear in a minute. To use Heroku, we need to create some special files which are which we need for Heroku only. So one of them is proc file. So proc file is a special file which is a mechanism for declaring what commands are run by your application dynos on the Heroku platform. So to run it on Heroku, we need proc file. It needs to be named as it is without any extension with a capital P. So just make sure that. Sorry. So now when we are deploying it, so you need to create two different files for two different directories. For WhatsApp bot, you will create a proc file. You'll just write one line, which is web unicorn app colon app. So basically what it is doing, and you need to also install unicorn. So to run web apps, because we used Flask to create a web app in a WhatsApp bot, and to run that, we need this line in proc file. Okay. So this is the process which we need to run, which is app here, okay? And for the scheduler folder, so we created another folder because there's difference in proc files. So later when we are using Heroku, so there is difference. So in the scheduler folder, because we are using a scheduler and I need to run that code each day once, okay? So for that, I'm using this clock. And I'm initializing it Python scheduler.py. So I want the scheduler.py to run, okay, at clock. So then it will run, run the script every time once, at every each day once. So for that, I have used this code in proc file for scheduler folder. So this was one file, which is proc file. The other ones are basically requirements.txt. Okay, so you can, it will contain all the third-party libraries required by the app. So we have used a couple of third-party libraries. So we need everything in the requirements.txt with their versions. So simply do pip trees, this requirements.txt, and for both the folders, and it will be generated. Then git ignore, because we are going to use Heroku, we'll be creating a git repo for both of the folders. So we'll just adding git ignore so that any of the specific pattern files are excluded, right? So this is how I'm doing that. And then runtime.txt, just to specify the particular version of Python to use. So that's a file for that. Now we are all set to create the Heroku apps for our folders. So I have listed all these steps very concisely, the steps we need to follow. So we are going to start with creating Git repos for both of our folders, then creating a Heroku account and downloading the Heroku CLI. And for those also the steps are linked. And just the fairly simple, the usual steps for creating a Git repo, then pushing Heroku master, and then just if you want to see the logs, then again there's a command for that as well. So after creating a local repo and using Heroku command line to create Heroku apps, what you will get is you'll get a URL for both of your apps. So the URL for the first app, which is for the WhatsApp bot, you're going to save that and you're going to put it here in, again, go to your Twilio console, Twilio sandbox for WhatsApp. After you performed all the configuration steps for sandbox, you will find this page, like this type of console, where you will see that to send and receive messages from Sandbox to your application, configure your endpoint URLs. So here you will be putting your endpoint URL for WhatsApp bot. So for the conversation, you will be putting here when a message comes in. So this will essentially direct whatever message comes to your Sandbox to your code, okay, where you're doing all the processing with HTTP post. Also, make sure that, because while we were configuring our Flask app, while we were routing in there, we used /SMS as endpoint. So just whatever you use, if you don't use any, then you need not change anything. But if you're using something, some other endpoint like /SMS I have used. So I'm just gonna append it with my Heroku app URL. So Heroku app URL /SMS, I'm just gonna append there, which I will be saving here, like when a message comes in. So here with the URL, I'll just append it. So well done, guys. This is all done. Now your chatbot is ready. So you can see a demo on your screen. This is the one I created. Exactly the same things, like, and now see I'm typing the date and the reminder message. It will be saved, and whichever date you have decided to get reminded that particular message for, you will receive that reminder. So that's all. Any questions? Let me just go with chat. Just a second. I hope you enjoyed the talk. Like, I really enjoyed giving it. Okay. Thank you. Sessions. Yes, they are recorded. When Twilio asks what do you plan to build with Twilio, do I click alerts and notifications or something? You can click anything. That doesn't really matter. You'll still be able to access all its services. So you can click whatever suits best to your needs. Is there a link to this presentation? Yeah, you can. You'll get the link to the presentation as well. Also, the blog link is already there. So there I have explained each and every line of code, which is not there in the presentation, just for your knowledge. So you can also go over that, and the link to the presentation will also be provided. Thank you so much. Okay. Can this project be extended to other apps like GroupMe? I really don't have any idea for that. Like, it can be, you need to, like, research about this thing from Twilio's side, because obviously you can code for anything, right? But is there a functionality where your code can communicate with other apps? So earlier also in Twilio, and there was no functionality of this WhatsApp. So around, I think 2018, 19, they have added this WhatsApp thing, because it's a big thing now. Everyone's on WhatsApp. So you need to check for from the Twilio's side, like whether that app for which you are building a bot is supported or not, because then only you will get the required helper functions to communicate. So communication is the base there. Thank you so much, Vedha. Thank you so much, Gloria. Okay, so I think there are no more questions. Thank you so much, Vishnu. Thank you so much, Kaya. Thank you so much all for attending. We have a lot of other events as well, which are super cool. You can go over our website to get registration links for all. Thank you so much all. Thank you, Sneha.